We have a little higher podium for you, so it'll be easier to do that.
But they're pretty close here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at the Heritage Foundation in our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website, as well as those who will be seeing us in the future on C-SPAN Book TV. We would ask everyone here in-house if you'll check that cell phones have been turned off as a courtesy as we begin. It's always appreciated by our speakers and those recording the events. We will, of course, post the program on our Heritage homepage for your future reference, and Internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. In the 1960s and 70s, conservatives, whether political candidates, policy groups, or activist organizations, had very limited, if any, means to get their message into the hands of the American people, and more importantly, past the monopoly of the liberal mainstream media. As a young conservative activist at the time, Richard Viguerie discovered that political candidates had to register their campaign donors with state offices, information that was in the public domain. Collecting those names and addresses by hand, state by state, was the beginning of what is now the largest list of active charitable and conservative donors in the world. Before long, Mr. Viguerie's direct mail agency and his lists enabled conservatives connect with tens of millions of Americans on a personal level regarding issues they cared passionately about. In doing so, it can be said that he reshaped America's political landscape. He continues to serve as chairman of the American Target Advertising, and with our colleagues at WND Books today, we are pleased to feature his latest publication, Takeover. Now, it looks like we're in the midst of 100 years War of the Roses, so if you can tell us how we're going to come out, it will be very appreciated, and we're so glad to welcome Richard Viguerie to Heritage. Richard.
Thank you, John, and thank Heritage Foundation, and thank Heritage Foundation's president, Jim DeMint, for this opportunity. Senator DeMint was my choice for president in 2008 and 2012. And I knew that Jim was going to be president. I just didn't know he was going to be president of the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation, the conservative movement, America is very fortunate to have Jim DeMint as its president. Jim has been the de facto leader of the conservative movement for many, many years. And as that leader, he has understood something that most conservatives, quite frankly, haven't understood, and I think it's been to our detriment. That's why I wrote the book Takeover. The subtitle of the book is 100-Year War for the Soul of the GOP and How Conservatives Can Finally Win It. And I should say that I jokingly refer to myself as 003. Means I've been active at the national level of the conservative movement longer than every living conservative except two others. 001 is the First Lady of the conservative movement, Phyllis Schlafly, and 002 is your distinguished colleague here, Dr. Lee Edwards. And so I have been at the front lines of this movement for a long time, and I've seen us take loss after loss after loss. And so I wrote this book because I think for the most part, conservatives haven't understood that they're in this battle. And you're not going to win a battle, much less a war, if you don't know you're in a war. And so I think it's very, very important for conservatives to understand the past, because if you don't understand the past, you're not going to know how to chart the future. So we've had, as a movement, in my opinion, our political guns pointed at the wrong target. We've been focused on the Democrats, Pelosi, Reid, Obama, and that has been a mistake, quite frankly, because the real opponent of conservatives is inside the Republican Party. We are like the biblical Jews who had to wander through the desert for 40 years until that generation of failed, flawed leaders had passed from the scene. And we're not going to get to the political promised land until we get new leaders, okay? And the American voters just do not agree with Republican leaders. They don't like the Republicans. The media and the big government Republicans have done a good job of blaming us conservatives, principled conservatives, limited government conservatives, Tea Partiers for their losses. But the opposite is the truth. The voters in 2006, 2008 took the Congress and the White House away from the Republicans. In my opinion, having nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Harry Reid, had everything to do with the failed, immoral, in my opinion, corrupt leadership of the big government Republicans. People just don't like them. And when they are the face of the opposition to the Democrats, Republicans seldom win. There have been four big Republican victories in my lifetime, and that's a long time, but only four. And in those four, the face of the opposition to the Democrats was conservatives, limited government conservatives. 1980 under Reagan, 1984, Reagan's reelection, 1994, contract with America, the Gingrich Revolution, 2010 under the leadership of the Tea Party. In 2010, the Boehner, Mitch McConnell, Karl Rove, Bush, none of them are to be seen in this election. What people see is Rush Limbaugh, Hannity, Levin, the Tea Party, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Marco Rubio. They liked that and gave the Republicans their biggest victory in 75, 80 years, okay? So if we want to win in the future, we're going to have to make sure that we keep some advice in mind. And I get my advice by paraphrasing James Carville. Remember 1992, Carville said ad nauseum over and over. We were tired of hearing him say, "Is the economy stupid? Is the economy stupid?" Well, I paraphrase that and say to conservatives, it's the primary stupid, it's the primary stupid. Because we can see as conservatives this wave coming. And it could be a wave of tsunami proportions that's going to drive the Democrats, many of them, out of office this fall. And if all it does is bring in more big government, establishment Republicans, we will have wasted the opportunity of a lifetime, conservatives. So it is the primaries. And most states, the filing deadline has not passed. So there's plenty of opportunity for conservatives yet to file for office, for the Congress, for state offices, governor, lieutenant governor, state legislators, city council, mayors, and we just have to remember it is the primaries. And in my opinion, it is entirely possible if we focus on taking back the Republican Party from the big government Republicans, we can do that in by 2016, in 2017, actually be governing America. You know, this war started actually 102 years ago. A lot of people think maybe it started with the Tea Party movement in 2009, 2010, or maybe in the Gingrich Revolution of 94, or certainly by 1980, when Reagan was nominated and elected. No, it started literally 102 years ago when Teddy Roosevelt failed to get the Republican nomination for president, went across the street, in essence, started the Bull Moose Party, and split the Republican vote, allowing Woodrow Wilson, a very progressive Democrat, to become president of the United States with less than 42% of the vote. So we've been fighting that wing of the party ever since. And sometimes our opponents look like Teddy Roosevelt, sometimes Alf Landon, sometimes Tom Dewey or Nixon or Ford or Bob Dole or John McCain or Mitt Romney. But that's and today it's John Boehner, Eric Cantor, Mitch McConnell, Lamar Alexander. We're fighting that wing of the party. And as I said earlier, the voters reject them. And only when the face of the opposition to the Democrats is a limited government, constitutional conservatives, do we score big victories. This very weekend, as a matter of fact, Republican leaders, Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, are meeting at the Ritz-Carlton in Amelia Island, Florida, meeting with the Main Street Partnership. And their objective of the Main Street Partnership is to, in Mitch McConnell's words, to crush them everywhere. That means us conservatives. So the Main Street Partnership that Eric Cantor and Kevin McCarthy are meeting with this weekend are designed to crush conservatives. So make no mistake about it. Our opponents in the Republican Party, the big government Republicans, they understand the problem, okay? And they understand that we are their opponents. We hear in the press about the conservatives have lost, ground. They've reached their high water mark. They're on the downhill now. Tea Party is not what it used to be. You know, the Main Street Republicans don't see it that way. They see us as a serious threat to the growth of government. So we're doing well, conservatives, but we've got a good ways to go. I remember back in the 50s when I got involved in politics, I was Harris County Young Republican chairman in the late 50s. And in those days, the conservative movement rested on just a two-legged stool. National defense, which really meant anti-communism, and economic issues, lower taxes, balanced budget, less government. And that was a two-legged stool, and we'd get 40, sometimes 45, maybe 47%. Very seldom did we get 51%. But only in the late 70s, under the leadership of Paul Weyrich, of Jerry Falwell, Ronald Reagan, they reached out and brought social conservatives into the conservative movement. Now we're sitting on a three-legged stool, and that changed everything. We begin to get 51, 52, 53% of the vote. We're not governing America, but we're winning. And a two-legged stool, as we know, is not very sturdy, and so that's why we seldom won. So now we're winning, but we're not governing America. And in my opinion, in recent years, there's been a fourth leg of that stool that's been added, and that fourth leg is the Tea Party. And sometimes people say, well, isn't the Tea Party just like the economic conservatives? They believe in lower taxes, less government, balanced budget. Yes, but there is a big, big difference. And the difference is this. A few years ago, I was a Friday night keynote speaker in Dallas, Texas, for about 125 conservatives who had gathered for a training session for the weekend. So first of all, I go out on the stage and look at my watch and tell them, say, where you been? I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting 50 years for you people, you know. And but it's all very true. But anyway, I met in my hotel room maybe with 12, 15 Tea Party leaders before the speech. Afterwards, maybe 15, 20. And I remember very clearly there was a woman there from Corpus Christi, Texas. And she headed up a Tea Party group of about, 3,000 people. And periodically they had meetings, and it was publicized in the paper. And local politicians would call and say, I want to come to your meeting next Thursday. She said, great, love to have you come. I'll tell you what, we'll introduce you. But you don't talk. You listen to us. I find that so refreshing. I don't know very many conservative leaders at the national level. I know just about all of them, and many of them are in this room, that would talk to a Republican politician like that. It is so refreshing. Reagan, in 1976, when he ran for president, had a wonderful phrase. I just love this phrase. He ran against the entire Republican establishment, remember, against the Rockefeller wing of the party. Rockefeller was vice president in 1976. Ran against the Ford wing, the Nixon wing, okay, of the party. And he said, we need new leadership, leadership unfettered by old ties and old relationships. The Tea Party is unfettered by old ties and old relationships. And so I think if we welcome the Tea Party in with these other groups that Reagan, launched us on in the late 70s, early 80s, we've got a very, very strong and winning coalition. The kind of a part of what I just said there was kind of a criticism of some of the Republican conservative leaders, and I think that too many conservative leaders, not those in this room here, of course, but too many of our friends became an arm. They became an appendage of the Republican Party, and they lost their independence. And we need a lot of things as conservatives. We need more organizations, more money, more candidates, more elected officials, more publications. But the number one thing that we need, in my opinion, above everything else, is new leadership, and leadership that's unfettered to the Republican Party. And along that line, I'm a big advocate of something that I call a third force, not a third party, but a third force. The left has had enormous success by establishing third force organizations. They have tens of thousands of third force organizations. Think of all the unions out there. Think of all the race-based organizations, the anti-family organizations, the environmental groups. If President Obama called a meeting of all the liberal environmental groups, it'd be hundreds there, maybe 1,000. White House probably couldn't hold them all. If Jim DeMint called a meeting of the conservative, free market environmental groups, there'd be a handful there. So on the left, they have the third force organizations have their own source of funds, their own membership, their own agenda, and they pull everybody their direction. And when you do that, you open up leadership positions for chairman, president, fundraising chairman, speaking opportunities, membership chairman. So the opportunities to bring in new leadership for our cause is magnified. You know, and very few people are really, really focused on politics. But everybody's concerned about something in their community, their neighborhood. Maybe it's their schools, maybe it's a crime issue, maybe it's overregulation of small business, maybe property rights. There are many, many issues that people are concerned, and get them focused on those. Remember, Hillary Rodham was a Goldwater girl, 1964. By the late 60s, she's a hardcore leftist, okay? And she didn't do it by just going from a Goldwater girl to the Democratic National Committee, okay? She got involved in a single-issue group, you know, anti-Vietnam War. And then that gave her the transition to the to all things liberal. So if people are not interested in joining your conservative organization or cause, think about what are the top issues in your community that you can get people involved in here. And there are many, many opportunities to get people involved in something dealing with public policy other than just the next election. You know, I don't want to, I'm very, very optimistic, and I'll talk about that in just a minute here, but we should not be under any illusion as to the challenge that we have in front of us. The leadership of every major institution in America, save possibly the military, is arrayed against us. The views and values of big business, Wall Street, unions, Hollywood, the media, nonprofit organizations, it goes on and on. All of these institutions, the leadership is arrayed against us. And if you haven't read another book out there, I strongly, after you buy and read my book, read Angelo Codevilla's The Ruling Class. Angelo, that Morton and I were with this weekend in Chicago for a conservative meeting, has brilliantly analyzed how the leaders of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party basically have rigged the rules to advantage themselves and their friends. So it's important to understand the magnitude of our problem and where where we need to go. The conservatives, having just, if you heard what I just said, if you understand it, it's easy to be discouraged, but we should not be discouraged. I am more optimistic than I've ever been in my life. For 50 years that I've been involved in politics at the national level, the conservative movement at the national level, people periodically ask me, Richard, is it too late? Have we gone too far down the road of socialism? Can we really turn things around at this late hour? And I've always had one answer and one answer only, whether that was 1970s or the 90s or recently. And that one answer was, we can turn things around. We can save America, providing one thing happens. And that is if things get real bad, real quick. Guess what? We're there. That water is boiling thanks to Obama, and the American people are jumping out of that as fast as they can. I say to people once, twice, 3 times a day, Obama's going to do something to anger you, frustrate you, upset, and I understand it. That happens to me too. That's okay. Take 30, max 40 seconds. Throw something, get upset, whatever. Then get down on your knees and thank God that he's President of the United States. Because I know no other way to save America. We're going to have some great victories in the coming years because of 2 things. One, the arrival of Barack Obama and almost simultaneously the arrival of the Tea Party that has brought so much new energy and leadership to our cause here. So be encouraged, conservatives. Some of us here, Morton Blackwell and others here, were there when, after 1964 defeat of Goldwater, after Nixon's resignation in 1974, with Jimmy Carter's election in 1976, when there was a darkness of biblical proportions. I mean, it was tough. As tough as it is now, we have things going for us now. We didn't have Jim DeMint then. We didn't have Rand Paul and Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and all of these wonderful governors, Mike Pence and Scott Walker. We didn't have all of them, okay? We didn't have talk radio. We didn't have cable television. We didn't have the internet. We have so much going for us now that we didn't have, but we persevered, and conservatives, we are close to prevailing. So I think that in 2016, conservatives, if you remember, it's the primaries, stupid. It's the primaries. And if we do that, we can score big victories in 2014, in 2016. We can nominate and elect a principled, limited government, constitutional conservative to be the Republican nominee, and elect that person in November and be governing America by 2017. So in order to chart the future, we've got to understand the past, as I said earlier, okay? So this is the Cliff Note version of my book, Takeover. Read the book, understand the problem, where we've been, where we are now, and how we go forward. And we've got a website called conservativehq.com that is focused entirely on building and relaunching the conservative movement. So thank you very much. Appreciate being here today.
We will be glad to recognize you for questions. If you'll wait for the microphone and be so kind as to identify yourself for our guest speaker. I do see that you subscribe to the Stan Evans School, since he always argued that the 1964 California primary and 76 North Carolina primary were the two most important primaries.
Oh, absolutely, very much so. What gives me an opportunity to say something that I don't often have the chance to say, but and it is that we have sung heroes of the conservative movement. We have the Barry Goldwaters, the Ronald Reagans, the Jim DeMints, and others. But we also have unsung heroes of the conservative movement. One of them is my friend Morton Blackwell here. Most Americans have not heard of him, but he's a person that we all stand on his shoulders. We're deeply in his debt. And on a short list, besides Morton, of unsung heroes is a man named Tom Ellis, who was a peer of former Senator Jesse Helms in North Carolina. And in my opinion, Tom Ellis almost single-handedly elected three of the best senators of the 20th century. Jesse Helms' first election in 1972, John East in 1980, and Lorch Faircloth. And Tom is still active, a lawyer in North Carolina, and Tom Ellis and Jesse Helms literally told Ronald Reagan and his team in 1976. By the way, Reagan, before he got to North Carolina, had lost 4 or 5 primaries. He lost the Florida primary, the New Hampshire primary, the Illinois primary, and things were looking really, really dark. So he wants to come into North Carolina, and Tom Ellis and Jesse Helms says, "Don't come in. We don't want you here. We will handle the campaign. We'll take care of it. Don't come in. However, if you insist on coming in, you have to do 4 things." And Jesse Helms and Tom Ellis told Reagan these 4 things, and the 4 things were: you must attack Ford, you must attack Kissinger, you must attack the giveaway of the Panama Canal, and you must attack detente. Reagan said, "I'm okay with all that." And he did that, and they leave, and they're supposed to lose the election. They leave North Carolina that afternoon of the election, flying to Wisconsin, and a friend of mine on the plane, who shall be nameless, great conservative today even, said that they were writing Reagan's withdrawal speech, that he was going to seriously consider withdrawing when he got to Wisconsin. However, when he got to Wisconsin, they learned they had scored a upset victory and won by 52 to 47% in North Carolina. The next primary is not for 5 weeks in Texas. And Reagan probably couldn't have held the campaign together that long. And so it was huge. And then when the Texas primary came along in early May, Texas has 100 counties. Reagan carried 100 counties. And that's how he became president.
Well, and the other ironic aspect is Goldwater in '64 and Reagan in '76, where you lost, but then you ultimately won.
Right. It's not original with me. Maybe George Will said it, but Goldwater was the most Senator Goldwater, running for president in 1964, was the most consequential loser in American political history. And Will also said that Barry Goldwater won the 1964 election. It just took 16 years to count the ballots.
Before hanging chads. Any other questions in the audience? Morton, you're bound to have a question, knowing you.
Okay. All right. I'm supposed to wait until I have a microphone.
Well, if you don't raise your hand, we won't get you a microphone.
Very
and
good.
knowing you'll have a statement anyway.
No, I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to lay a groundwork.
Yes.
In 1980, when Reagan sewed up the nomination, George Herbert Walker Bush was the last surviving serious opponent to him, and Reagan sewed it up in 1980. If you define everybody who supported Reagan at the time that he sewed it up, and you call them Reaganites, and those who were not supporting Reagan at that point don't qualify as Reaganites, even though many of them did support him when he became the nominee. Since Reagan, the Republican Party has nominated a number of other candidates for President of the United States. It happens that none of those nominees met the definition of Reaganite, which I just gave you. And here's the statement that John knew was coming. I think it's high time for us to nominate another Reaganite. My question is, who should that be?
Thank you, Morton. Well said. In this very building, some years ago, Dr. Lee Edwards had a panel discussion on one of his 20-plus books that he's written. And I remember Frank Shakespeare, the great conservative ambassador Frank Shakespeare, was in the audience. And Frank asked a version of that question, Morton. He said, in all the years we've had the conservative movement since the early 50s through now, we've only thrown up from the grassroots one principled conservative, Ronald Reagan. And why haven't the conservatives done a more successful, better job? And no one had the answer, and I certainly didn't at that time. I am very, very encouraged, though, Morton, going forward. Since 1984, we have seldom had a major top-tier conservative running for the Republican nomination. We've had some good conservatives, but quite frankly, many of them, if not most of them, weren't top tier. In 2016, I think we're going to have a traffic jam of limited government constitutional conservatives running for president. Now, without giving away who my favorite candidate is, and I could be happy with any number of them right now. What I do is marketing, and that's what I've done for 50 years, is market. So when you've got a product, a cause, you have to position, if you want to be successful, your product opposite the competition. If we assume that our competitor in 2016 is going to be a Washington insider, i.e. Hillary Clinton, I don't think you want another Washington person to run against him. I think the strongest candidate would be somebody in the states. So we have many, many good governors, Mike Pence, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, Rick Perry, Rick Scott in Florida. We have many, many to choose from. And I think that would make the strongest ticket in 2016. Now, probably shouldn't say this, but I think it's important for us to as conservatives, and we chart the future, to understand this. Back in the 60s, there was an element in public politics that was trying to take over the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and under the leadership of Bill Buckley, we successfully fended off these people, and they're identified to known today as libertarians. We had a big battle with them, and Republicans, conservatives prevailed, okay? The libertarians are back stronger than ever, and in many ways that's a good thing. We don't agree on all the issues, but there are many things that we do agree on. And I think that is important for conservatives to find common ground with the libertarians. And I think that if we don't do that, it's going to be difficult for us to win presidential elections as well as many governors and Senate elections. I, in my lifetime, have not seen a finer principled conservative run for major office than Ken Cuccinelli running for governor in Virginia this past November. And a libertarian candidate ran against him, got 7% of the vote. That's an outrage, in my opinion. So in order to have as strong a united voting base as we can, I think conservatives would be well advised to look to maybe come back to Washington for a vice presidential nomination and take a good look at Rand Paul. Rand Paul has a large following, not only libertarians, young people out there, and you bring a ticket together like that, I think it can be just unbeatable.
Sorry, Terry Campo, various
Terry,
Republican
absolutely. Good to see you, Terry.
things. Fortunately, I was on the right side, 76 and 80 with Morton. But your question raises a really important point. You referred to the traffic jam of the conservatives. Isn't that part of the problem that, in effect, the last 3 or 4 election cycles, we've had 3 or 4 strong conservative candidates who have split the vote on the right within the Republican primaries, allowing the single moderate establishment figure to basically prevail with 40% of the vote.
Remember, it's the primaries.
Yes, exactly. No, Terry, you're exactly right. I'm not sure that a lot of the conservatives who have recently run were top tier, but we did have some good candidates there, and that is a serious problem. The primaries, and Morton could knows 1,000% more about this than I do, but the early primaries, many of them are in the Northeast, and it's winner take all. So with 30%, you get all the delegates. Then when you go down south, it's proportionate for the most part. So if you're a conservative and you get 30% of the vote and it's divided other ways, everybody else splits that vote too. So the moderate, a Jeb Bush, a Chris Christie type could get a good number of votes, and 100% of the votes in the Northeast and a lot of votes down south and the same out west. So it is a problem, and hopefully the conservatives will unite behind one candidate and avoid this problem that we've had in the past. Let me mention one thing here along that line. Periodically people ask me, said, Richard, why do you think that John McCain is not a conservative? Or why do you think Mitt Romney is not a conservative? I've developed something I call Vigory's foolproof test of whether you're a conservative. Absolutely foolproof, guarantee it. And it is this. I never saw Ronald Reagan in the late 60s and throughout the 1970s, and I saw him a fair amount. But I never saw him except I saw the friends of the conservative movement around him. When you saw Reagan, you say, well, there's Len Nufsinger, and there's Ed Meese, and there's Marty Anderson, and there's Dick Allen, and there's Judge Clark, and there's Paul Laxalt. So it was natural when Reagan became president, January 20th, 1981, conservatives moved into the White House with him. Not enough. Some of us are meeting with a presidential candidate, I guess I should not identify him here, in the past. And he goes around the table and he says to 20, 25 of us, he says, Morton, what's your issue? And Phyllis, what's your issue? And Tony, what's yours? And Gary, what's yours? I'm towards the last of the table there, and he says, Richard, what's yours? And I said, all due respect to my friends, Governor, they're all wrong. Nobody has talked about the most important issue. The most important issue is personnel. We all have learned that for many years ago, personnel is policy. And I explained that to the candidate. And I said, if you're fortunate enough to move into Pennsylvania Avenue, if you're elected president, and all that moves in with you are Fortune 500 CEO types, Wall Street types, our issues are over with. We've lost, okay? Personnel is policy. So when somebody tells you they're a conservative, look at them. Who's around them? Who do they walk with, okay? Some of these governors that I've talked to, we certainly know Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, they walk with us, okay? And some of the governors do the same. So if you haven't walked with conservatives for the last 15, 20 years, if you move into that White House, you're not likely to all of a sudden surround yourself with conservatives. I have, our company of 77 employees. One of our presidents, Mark Fitzgibbons, is here. Mark comes into my office with 4 or 5 of our other executives and said, Richard, we've studied this problem, and we think you should go over here. I'm not like to say, no, nope, you're all wrong. You'll go over here. You know, I trust these people. I have confidence in their judgment, and they suggest I do X. I'm highly likely to do X, okay? Same for the President of the United States. So personnel is policy, conservatives.
Another question? Oh.
Speaking of Mark Fitzgibbons.
Richard, the Tea Party emphasizes the Constitution. You talked about Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee. And the three of them have in common their emphasis on the Constitution. In distinguishing between the conservative movement and the establishment Republicans, what role do you see the Constitution plays in the debate for 2014, 2016, and how we can move America forward to essentially reclaim the Constitution?
Well, I'm really hesitant to have any conversation about the Constitution with my friend Mark, who's a world-class constitutional scholar. You know, maybe there's no more important issue out there than the Constitution. And I don't think I said this, but I meant to in my prepared remarks, that the Democratic Party entirely has come unhinged from the Constitution. And most of our Republican leaders are unhinged. Can you just imagine the Republican Democratic leaders of Congress analyzing something? Was this farm bill, is this constitutional? Is this tariff constitutional? Is this legislation, does it pass constitutional muster? And it's highly unlikely that that thought ever crosses their mind. And we all remember Nancy Pelosi's famous comment who asked where in the Constitution is Obamacare allowed, permitted, and she said, are you kidding me? She had no interest in that. Mark, that is one of the things that has launched the Tea Party, their faithfulness to the Constitution. I think too many people in politics have forgotten about it. We've probably heard more about the Constitution in the last 5 years or so than maybe in the previous 50 years. And so it's very healthy. So I encourage all of you out there, emphasize the Constitution, make sure that the candidates that you support, that you get involved with, that they understand the Constitution and they're going to be faithful to the Constitution and our founding documents. And Mark has taught me a lot. And one of the things he's likes to stress is Madison's, in the Federalist Papers 44, where Madison talks about there is a remedy available to the people, and that is called elections. Okay, so Madison said that if we're having politicians who are not faithful to the Constitution, there is a remedy in the Constitution, and we can vote them out of office. Let me make one additional comment, John, about what Morton said earlier about Bush 41. Reminded me that there were those Reaganites that like Morton in 76 and all through the late 70s, 1980. And in my opinion, President Reagan, he did, you know, he wasn't Saint Reagan. He did make some mistakes. And his first decision after he got the Republican nomination was probably his worst decision. And that was when he selected George Bush to be his vice president. George Bush campaigns, George H.W. Bush campaigns throughout the 80s and says, trust me, I am a conservative. And if I'm nominated, elected, I will govern as a conservative. In the 1984 Republican Convention in Dallas, Texas, I'm there with Howard Phillips, President Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, and Dan Rather interviews us one night on television. And so he asked us about the vice president, and we explained he's not, in our opinion, a conservative for this reason, this reason, this reason. The next night, Dan Rather has George H.W. Bush, the vice president, on, and he says, Mr. Vice President, last night I had Howard Phillips and Richard Viguerie on, and they say you're not a conservative for these various reasons. What do you say, Mr. Vice President? You're a conservative? And I have to chuckle when I think of his answer. Yes, Dan, I'm a conservative, but I'm not a nut about it. And he certainly wasn't. He's sworn in at noon, January 20th, 1989. By sundown, that very day, every Reaganite in the Reagan administration that could be identified was fired. Not in the coming days or weeks. That day, in the first 5 hours by sundown, they had politically executed every Reaganite. You could have supported Bush in the 88 primaries. Didn't matter. If you supported Reagan in the 1980 primary fight, you were fired, and you were persona non grata in the George H.W. Bush administration. So remember, conservatives, who you walk with. Personnel is policy.
I think Bonner had a question there in the back.
Bonner Cohen, National Center for Public Policy Research. Yes. What are your thoughts on how conservatives should address the changing demographics of the United States? This isn't demographically the same country as it was when Goldwater ran in '64 or when Reagan ran in '80 and '84. And if you look at the results of the 2012 presidential election, even allowing for the fact that Mitt Romney was no conservative by any stretch of the imagination, you do see how poorly he did in various minority communities. I think he got 59% of the white vote, but was wiped out substantially in other ethnic and racial groups. So you mentioned that, of course, you're in the business of marketing. How would you market conservatism to the new demographics in the United States? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. I got asked that question last night on the Lou Dobbs show. In terms of the minorities, Hispanics, Asians, there are many things that we need to do. In my opinion, number one, above everything else, let's say, how do you get the Hispanic vote? Very simple. Run Hispanics. I think go out there and look for the Marco Rubios, the Ted Cruzes out there, and Susana Martinez. We have many ethnic conservatives out there, and I think we ought to, showcase them, put them forward, and that'll go a long ways towards communicating to these various minorities that we are very much in sync with them. I'm a big believer that we've got to change the rhetoric, of course, is how we talk about people here who are here illegally, illegal aliens. But I think that these people, for the most part, with rare exceptions, don't want to come here, okay? But they've got an economy in their own home country that is disastrous. They're governed by socialists or Marxists, and whatever we can do within the Constitution to help these people get a free market, rule of law established in their own country, their economy is going to improve. And we're seeing fewer Mexicans come over because their economy is improving, and they are instituting some free market reforms in Mexico. And so we've got to make it, I don't care how high you build a fence, people will figure ways to get over it, around it, under it. And so I think we have to go to the root cause of why these people are coming here in the first place. They don't want to come except their economy is so terrible. But another problem is that for the most part, the people who Americans are seeing as Republicans don't know how to talk to people who are part of the country class, as Angelo Codevilla says, versus the ruling class. The ruling class doesn't know how to talk to average Americans. And when we put the Ted Cruzes out there, and the Rand Pauls, and the Mike Lees, and the Tim Hewell's camp, and the Justin Amash's out there, and Mike Pence and Scott Walker, they will communicate quite nicely our views and our values to unmarried women, to Hispanics, to Asians. And so as long as our message is going through the John Boehnards and the Mitch McConnells and the Eric Cantors of the world, we're going to have a problem. We need to change the messengers. People don't have a problem with our message. It's our messengers.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.